All right, let's get into this. I want you to think back to the last day of school. Just that feeling of pure, unfiltered joy, right? The final bell rings, you burst out the doors, and you are free. It's this universal moment of celebration. You know the scene, yearbooks are getting passed around, everyone's scribbling, have a great summer to friends you might not see for months. The air is just electric with the promise of summer. Long, lazy days, no homework. It's all about those bittersweet goodbyes and the excitement for whatever's next. But imagine that feeling, that sense of relief, just twisting into something else, something dark. What happens when that final day, that symbol of freedom, becomes a memory you wish you could just erase? Well, today, we're going to dive into 3 true stories where a day of total joy was permanently stained by fear. So, we're going to start with a really mysterious yearbook message that leads to an absolutely terrifying night. Then, we'll look at how a senior tradition spiraled out of control into a violent confrontation. And to wrap it up, we'll uncover the story of a quiet student who was not at all what he seemed.
Okay, so our first story kicks off on the very last day of 8th grade. You know, amidst all of the chaos of yearbook signing, a simple, friendly tradition takes a really, really frightening turn. So picture this. The narrator gets his yearbook back at the end of the day. He's flipping through it, reading all the notes from his buddies, but then he stops. He lands on a page with a face he has never seen before. The name underneath, Samuel Robinson III. And this is what was written. Hags, I'll be seeing you again. Now, Hags was just short for have a great summer, a pretty common thing to write back then. But that second part, I'll be seeing you again, coming from a total stranger? It's unsettling. But, he just writes it off as some weird kid being weird and tries to forget about it. So that night, the narrator's having some friends over for a sleepover in the basement. Everything's totally normal until about 2 in the morning. That's when they hear it. This sharp, rhythmic knocking at the storm door that leads outside. Then they hear this muffled voice telling them to come to the back door of the house. So they creep upstairs, hearts just pounding, and they look through the kitchen window. And there he is, Samuel Robinson III, just standing there under the dim porch light, smiling. He motions for the narrator to come closer, but then one of the friends yells out, calls him a creepy stalker, and Samuel's whole face just changes. The smile is gone. He starts screaming, throwing himself against the window, trying to pry it open, just banging his fists on the glass like a caged animal, until the narrator's parents run downstairs and he finally just disappears into the darkness.
The next morning, his parents call the school. And this is where it gets truly chilling. The school tells them that Samuel had actually been expelled weeks ago. He shouldn't have been on campus at all. He had literally snuck in just to write that one message in that one yearbook. And when they tried to find him, it was like he and his entire family had just vanished. They were completely untraceable.
Let's shift gears now to our second story. This one involves graduating seniors, a night of partying, and a tradition that takes a really dangerous, violent turn.
The narrator introduces us to his friend Garrett, who's this guy that kind of prides himself on being aggressive, a little bit unhinged. So it's the last day of senior classes, and true to tradition, the entire graduating class is out on campus celebrating. The narrator and his friends, Garrett included, are right in the middle of this citywide party. So, as they're walking home through the city, they see a homeless man. While everybody else tries to just walk around him, Garrett decides to start yelling at him. The man gets aggressive, takes a few steps toward them, and the group has to pull Garrett back. But it's not over. A few minutes later, they realize the man is following them. Garrett, being Garrett, charges at the guy again to try and scare him off for good. They figure, okay, problem solved. Later that night, the narrator goes to get his food delivery, and he notices the side gate to his backyard is wide open. He's drunk, he's alone, and he decides to investigate. As he rounds the corner into his own yard, a rope is thrown around his throat from behind. He's being strangled. He manages to kick backward, which knocks them both to the ground. His attacker claws at his face for a second before getting up and just running off into the darkness. He actually ends up in the hospital and has visible cuts in all of his graduation photos. But what's really fascinating is his final thought on the whole thing. It's not about being angry at his attacker. It's this chilling observation about his friend. I just hope he's learned his lesson about not antagonizing people who have nothing to lose. Okay, our final story is maybe the most bizarre. It's all about this strange, quiet 7th grader and a last day of school tradition that was hiding a truly disturbing plan. This is Sven, and Sven was that kid. The one who never socialized, always wore the exact same oversized hoodie, and had these weird habits, like slicing up worms during recess. At breaks, he would just stand by himself, right next to the fence that bordered the woods. He was just kind of part of the school's background noise.
So, on the last day of school, there was this tradition where students would just sneak into random classrooms to mess with the teachers. The narrator's in a class with Sven, and the room is packed with all these unfamiliar faces. At some point, the teacher, Miss Bell, gets a call on the classroom phone. She turns her back to the class, and a few minutes later, another teacher shows up, and they start whispering urgently right outside the door.
What happens next is super subtle. The teachers come back into the room, walk over to a few specific kids the narrator has never seen in his life, and quietly whisper something to them. A minute later, those kids just get up and leave the classroom. No explanation, no big deal. Almost immediately after they leave, the fire alarm goes off. The whole school evacuates to the field outside, but they don't go back in. Instead, they hear sirens and a whole line of police cars pulls up. Officers just rush straight into the supposedly empty building. The students are told, "School's out early, call your parents." The really crucial piece of the puzzle is revealed later by the narrator's parents. Those kids who were pulled out of the classroom, they didn't even go to the school. The rumor was they were planning to set the school on fire. And Sven, all that time he spent just standing by the fence during recess, he had used it to let them in. Sven was never seen again. So what we have are 3 stories that all start with a celebration and end in fear. But the real sense of dread here doesn't just come from what happened. It comes from where it happened, in a classroom, at a party, inside someone's house. These are all places that were supposed to be safe.
And this is really the core of it, right? For the 8th grader, the big question isn't just what Samuel did, but how on earth he found his way to a private home. For the college senior, that attack wasn't random. It was payback brought right to his own backyard. And with Sven, the threat wasn't an outsider. It was someone who was on the inside the whole time. The horror isn't just in the mystery. It's in realizing that the walls we build around ourselves, both physical and social, are way more fragile than we think.
Each of these events started with something that was pretty easy to just dismiss. A weird note in a yearbook, a drunken boast, a quiet kid who kept to himself. They're all a chilling reminder that the line between the ordinary and the terrifying is incredibly thin. And it leaves us with a final, much bigger question. Not just what warning signs we might be missing, but how much of our daily sense of security is just built on an illusion we can't afford to have shattered.